Alright, hello and welcome to How to Make Belts. I'm Rain, I am SG393. I've been in Saber Guild for almost 7 years and doing leatherworking about as long. I'm going to be going over a little bit of how to make original trilogy style belts and prequel trilogy style belts. There are definitely different methods of making these belts. This is just the method that I use. It is by no means the only method or the perfect method, but it is a method. So, a little bit of the supplies that you'll need. You'll need leather, if you're using real leather, which is what I do. This is veg-tanned cowhide. I get most of my leather from a place called Tandy Leather. They have a physical location near where I am, and I really like going and getting leather physically because that way I can check the hides. So yeah, veg tan, double shoulder will give you the length that you need. You can also buy belt blanks sometimes. Just make sure that you get the right width. Those are going to be just a strip, a pre-cut strip. Sort of depending on what kind of belt you want, those may or may not work out well. As far as metalwork goes, you need belt studs. Little belt studs, those are what goes in on a prequel trilogy style belt. You'll also need a belt buckle. There are a bunch of different types. Alright, front release, buckles, press on the middle, side comes out. Put it back together. Side release, press on the sides, it comes out. If you're going for the original trilogy style, you just want a plain rectangular buckle. You can also get ones that are octagonal. These ones that I tend to use are ones from Tandy. They are extremely cheap. They're like $3. Older ones did come with sort of some artifacts on them from being like ground down. So I just took this to a belt sander and got those off. But apparently recently they have been doing better about that. You'll also want, depending on the kind of belt you make and your specifics, Chicago screws. They're just sort of little screws. I'll go over them a little bit more later. Leather sinew thread, if you are going to be sewing any pieces of it. You'll also want leather scissors. Please definitely love yourself and get leather scissors. Don't try and use kitchen scissors or fabric scissors or anything like that. It will make your life so much easier to get leather shears. They're not that expensive. Hole punch for leather. Strap cutter, not necessarily required, but makes your life so much easier. Also not too expensive. And then a little stylus. This is just little pointy metal tool for imprinting on leather. For dyeing, you will want actual dye. It is EcoFlow water stain leather dye. Make sure that you get leather dye, not leather stain. I realize it says water stain on it, which is a little bit confusing, but you want leather dye. And then you also want this stuff called gum trigacanth. It is sort of your burnishing, finishing material. You'll also want plastic gloves, paper towel, and something to dye on, which I will get to a bit later. When you buy a hide, you will not have a nice straight edge like this. It'll be a little more rough edges, so you will need to make your own edge. This works just fine with like a yardstick. Draw along that line, cut it with your scissors. I already have these as belt hides, so they're already cut. If you don't want to use a strap cutter or don't have a strap cutter, that's okay. You can measure out your width, draw a line, and then cut along it. I just find that this makes my life so much easier, and it makes your edges a lot more consistent. Most belts are going to be 2 inches wide. That's sort of the standard. If you are a particularly large or small person, you might want a wider or thinner belt because it should be a little bit more proportional to you. But yeah, so If you're, I'm gonna go off the assumption that you're using one of these. If not, that's okay. This is set to be 2 inches. I'm gonna slide the leather into that groove and just pull along it. The whole length of that leather. I'm gonna do this a couple because I'm making a couple belts. For the Prequel Trilogy style belt, you're also going to need a thinner piece for the thinner inner belt. Usually that will depend on the size of your buckle. For this, I'm going to use the side release one. This is a 3/4 inch opening, which is the width that you will want to cut that strap. So I just changed this to be 3/4 inches, and I'm using the strap cutter to cut on that. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to get started. There we go. Alright, so here we have our leather. I'm going to be making 2 Prequel Trilogy style belts. So they have their inner, outer pieces, and then I'm going to make 1 original Trilogy style belt. You will also need pieces, short pieces of the thin material for keepers as well as the thicker. The thinner ones will be keepers near the buckle, and then the thicker one will be the keeper that covers the overlap in the back. So depending on the length of belt that you are making, you can sometimes use end pieces of this. If it's long enough, you can just cut a piece off, use that as the keeper. For these, I'm planning to make them as long as possible because I don't know who they're going to end up with. So I'm going to cut mine out of scrap leather. Alright, so here I have all the pieces of leather I'm going to need. I have my strips of leather. I have 2 pieces of leather for keepers. The OT style belt does not need a keeper. And then I have these little pieces for the front keepers for the Prequel Trilogy style belts. I do generally recommend folding your leather over, because that's how it's going to go around the buckle. And then folding your little pieces around it, pre-stretching that out before you dye it. I just find that that works better and tends to result in the dye being more even. If you dye first and then fold it around, sometimes where that fold and where that stretches can actually get a little bit lighter. I recommend doing the same thing for the keepers in the back, around the back. I did cut the corners at an angle on these. That is personal preference. They won't even be visible, but that way they have a little bit of a less tendency to get caught on bits of your costume against your back. So just folding those over to begin with. Fold them more later, but just getting that initial fold out of the way. And then one last thing before we actually get to dyeing. These are 2 pieces of equipment that I completely forgot about earlier. They are also completely optional. The first one is an edge beveler. There we go, you can sort of see it. It has this little in the middle, it has a little opening that is to get the edges of the leather to sort of be curved. And then we have this, which is an edge groover. Let's see if it'll focus on that. Yeah, there we go. And I'll show you how to use those in just a minute. For both of these, you do want a hard surface to be doing this on, so not carpet. So now I'm on my kitchen floor. It is tile, it is hard. I'm also gonna use this opportunity to sort of clean up the ends of these, just trim them down. Make sure you don't trim them too short. You can always trim them down later, you cannot add material back. Alright, edge groove first. It is entirely optional whether or not you do this. It's just a decorative feature. I generally do it on the thicker pieces, but not the thin ones, because the thin ones are already so narrow that adding grooves tends to make them look a little bit busy, but it is up to you. Alright, you want to make sure that you're not on one of these ridges on the floor if you have a floor like this, because it will mess up your edge groove. I also recommend trying this out on scrap leather before you go for it on your whole belt. But you're going to put the edge of the metal piece against the edge of your leather, and you're going to push down and you're going to pull it towards you, and as you do so you're digging in this side here, and it is going to be cutting this little groove in, and you see there's like this little, it's taking off a piece of leather here, a little scrap. I'm just going to scoot my leather as I go along because I don't want to go over the divots in my floor. And how far from the edge of the leather you have your groove is entirely up to you. It is a personal preference. Alright, so I've got my edge grooves done, so now it is time for the edge beveling, if you should so desire. I'm going to do it on one of mine and not on the others. It is entirely up to you, personal preference. The way this is going to work is you're going to use this on the edge of your leather. You are now starting from the end closest to you and pushing forward rather than pulling. So you're going to take the little groove in it, line it up at an angle on the edge of it, and push along, and you're going to see that it's just sort of shaving off this little edge, if it will even focus. Come on, camera. Making this little edge bevel here. You can do it on both the front and along the back sides. It is really up to you. We're gonna go ahead and do that on one of these. Again, making sure that you are avoiding any divots in your floor or table or whatever hard surface that you are using. I'm going to show you on the back. You can do the back as well. The back is a little harder, especially if you have this sort of like very fluffy back. Kind of depends on what part of the hide you're working on. Some of the back is more smooth versus more rough. Alright, so I have edge beveled the ones that I desire to do so. I'll also be making a document and putting a couple photos in that of a little bit closer up so you can really see what it looks like. But now that we have our leather cut and edge grooved, it is time to dye it. The materials you need for this is obviously leather dye. Again, this is the EcoFlow, is the one that I usually use. There are a couple other main brands as well. I get most of mine from Tandy Leather, but you can get it a lot of places online as well. I'm going to make one belt black and one belt medium brown. There are a lot of different shades of brown you can go for. You can also go for red if you're going Sith. I definitely recommend red leather dye rather than red leather paint. It just, in my opinion, looks better. Experiment around with the colors on scrap leather first before you just go for dyeing your whole belt. Also, gloves, very important. Do not make the mistake that I usually do of saying, oh, I'll just test dye this little bit here. I'll just be careful and it won't get on my fingers. It will get on your fingers. It is leather dye. It is designed for dyeing the hide of a cow. It will dye your hands or whatever part of your skin it touches. Paper towels. You can get specialized little, like, they look like cotton balls on sticks to apply dye with. I find they are, one, more expensive and work worse. I just have not been able to get a good even dye with those, so I don't use them. I use paper towels. And then I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but you also want the gum tragacanth that I talked about earlier. So, gloves first. I also recommend doing this on a surface that is like a hard floor surface. That way, in case you should spill any dye, it will be easier to clean up than on, say, carpet. I also use cardboard. It's a big piece of cardboard to dye on. You could use like a painter cloth or something like that if you wanted. Just, you know, maybe don't do it directly on your floor. But I found that cardboard has been super helpful for that. All right, so we want to put that away. I'm not doing black on this one. All right, so I have my medium brown dye. Shake it up a little bit. Get a piece of paper towel. I tend to fold it into quarters. I just find that that makes the paper towel last the longest. I'm going to scoot this, so I start at one end and go to the other. Open the bottle. The bottles are really weird. You push at the top to open it, not squish from the sides. I'm really bad at that. Alright. These have a little spigot on the inside of them. Some dye bottles don't have that. So if it doesn't have that, be especially careful, because if those bottles fall over, you're going to have dye all over everything. These ones, if they fall over, you might get a little drop spilled out, but you won't have the entire bottle of dye on your floor. So you're gonna put a little bit on the corner of the paper towel. Just start from one end and start working it in. Don't worry too much about going overboard, but like, you just want a nice coat on it. You're gonna work it into the grooves a little bit. It will probably end up looking a little bit splotchy to begin with. That's okay. It will dry evenly as long as you do have a thorough coat of dye over all of it. I usually do the whole whole front part first, but for the sake of the video, I'm going to show how to do the edges and back. Edges are pretty straightforward. Just take dye on your little thing, run it along the edges. Just want to make sure that you get nice coverage on all of the edges. How you do it is a little bit up to you. You just want to make sure that the entire edge does get dyed. Also, you're not required to dye the back of it, but I find that it really helps. Especially for leather, parts of the leather where it have a really rough back. That will keep sort of shedding onto your costume. Whereas if you dye it, that dye really sort of helps stick it all together. Be aware, the back of the leather will suck up a lot of dye, so just keep that in mind. Leave that for last if you're low on dye. But it will also sort of murder your paper towels. But put that, again, sort of, it does not go a long way on the back. You're gonna need quite a bit. And then just go over the front and do that with all your pieces of leather. If you find as you're doing the edges or the back that you get some on the front, that's fine. Just wipe it along, wipe it in, and it will all even out at the end. Alright, so I have gotten to the point of having all my pieces dyed. Depending on how much you're making, you might have a pausing point here to wait for your dye to dry. I had enough stuff that I needed to dye that by the time I just finished, the stuff that I initially dyed is already dry. So I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next step. Here we have dyed leather, but it's kind of dull. It doesn't look quite finished. This is where this gum tragacanth is going to come into use. So once again, you're going to be using paper towels. I don't wear gloves for this. You can if you want to. It will not stain your hands. And I do recommend, though, if you wear rings or anything like that, take those off. Once again, I'm going to fold mine into quarters because that's just how I like to work. Find the end of this and give it a little shake. It has a very weird consistency. It's kind of like somewhere between hand sanitizer and Jell-O. It's just a very weird texture. But you're going to pour out a little bit onto your paper towel, and you're just going to start at one end and just rub it on. The key here is friction. You want to give it as much friction as you can, because that is what is actually going to help give it that final finished look. It'll come off a little bit on your paper towel, that's fine. Swap around to different parts of the paper towel so it keeps being rough. and you just want to keep rubbing at it. Eventually, you'll feel a difference in the texture, where it'll sort of go from sort of hard to rub and sort of almost sticky to really, really smooth. And you're going to see that it is a lot shinier, it's a lot thicker, a lot more depth of color, and it just looks a lot more finished. For comparison, post a photo of this as well. This is the side that has the gum on it. It looks finished, it looks nice. This is the unfinished one, it just kind of looks dull. I think it would still be approvable, but the gum is not that expensive, and it's not that hard to put on, so I just strongly recommend it. You want to do the fronts, and you want to do the sides. For the sides, there's a specific stick that you can use. Looks like this. I don't ever actually use this. I've had bad experiences with dye that is on the stick rubbing off on the leather, and I've just found that it just doesn't work as well. What I use instead is my finger. So dip my finger in the gum, rub my finger along the edge, and just, again, you want that friction. So I guess the stick would probably, save your finger a little bit of the friction. But you just want to rub that in, work your way along. You want to do the sides and the front. If it a little bit goes over to the front, that's fine. Just wipe it off. Might want to use your paper towel to get that friction back again. But up to you. Don't worry about the back. You don't need to add anything to the back. Once the back is dyed, it's fine. No one's gonna see it. So you want to go ahead and do that to all your pieces of leather, including your keepers. Alright, now that we have our leather all set, it is time to add the metalwork. I'm going to start with the original trilogy style belt first, just because it is a lot more simple. You have your leather, you got your buckle, you got these things called Chicago screws, a leather punch, and scissors. So you're going to take one end of your leather, you're going to take your buckle, you're going to put it through. If it ends up being a little bit tight, that's okay. You can always trim in the sides if you need to. I'm going to stick it through there. And you want to have enough that it can wrap around and double back on itself. So that way, from the front, it looks all nice like that. Alright, so you need a way though to fasten this. This is where the Chicago screws come in. You're going to want to find a place about halfway between, up and down. And how far from the buckle you want is a little bit up to you. Just make sure that there's enough place on the back to be able to put the other part of the Chicago screw through. So I'm going to pick, let's see here, measuring tape and a little stylus to mark on the leather where I want to punch the hole. So I'm going to just mark 1 inch between the two sides, a nice little dot. Take the hole punch on the largest hole and punch that hole through the leather. You got a nice hole. Fold over the leather, use my little stylus to mark, make sure that the leather is lined up, mark on the other piece of the leather where that is, pull it out, got my nice dot on that part of the leather, punch that hole, and now you can fold it over, you have the nice holes line up. Take your Chicago screw, poke it through the holes, and put in the back. If there is some, so I can get the lighting, if there is some sticking out and it's not perfectly flush, you can add another piece of scrap leather to it I'm just going to use, this is not the same color brown, but that's okay because it's going to be on the inside and no one is going to see it. So I'm just going to cut off a little piece, punch a hole in the middle of it, approximately. I'm not going to bother measuring because, again, no one's going to see it. Put that on. Come on. And then take the bottom part of my screw and screw it in. You can use either a actual screwdriver here, or you can do what I usually do. I have a designated butter knife that I will use for screws. It is up to you. I find that this helps if you need to get in from the side on something, but up to you. You just want to make sure that it screws in and it's nice and tight. You can make sure every now and then that it is tight, and there you have your buckle. If you have like a little bit of a corner sticking out here, I don't know if you can actually see that, a little bit of an edge, you can always undo the Chicago screw, just trim the edge down ever so slightly, re-dye that edge so that it's not visible, and there you have one half of your belt buckle. The other end of your belt, you're going to want to poke a hole in it. This is part where you want to put this on and figure out where you want to put the hole, because this is going to determine how big the belt is. I don't know who this is going to yet, so I'm just going to make it as big as possible. You want to make sure that you punch the hole, again, in the middle. That can just hook in there and you have a nice belt. You also want to make sure that this is pretty tight because otherwise your belt buckle is going to go, or your belt is going to go like this and it's going to look weird. If you do have problems with that, you can just put some Velcro on the back of the buckle and on the part of the leather that is going to go onto that, and so you can put it in and Velcro it there so that it doesn't rotate at all. That is sort of up to you. Alright, now for the Prequel Trilogy style belt, it's going to end up looking something like this. This is the black one that I was making that I already finished, but now we're going to do the brown one. You want your buckle, you want the studs for it, and the backs for the studs, and then you have your leather pieces, your keepers, your little keepers for the front, your big keeper for the back, your thick piece of leather, and your thin piece of leather. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. I am just going to go over the way that I tend to do it. I'm going to start with the thinner belt. I'm going to make the little keepers for it. You can glue these or just straight up like sew them under the keepers or whatever you want to do. I don't like doing that. I like having the friction of the keeper hold them in place, because that way they are adjustable. If you end up needing to make it tighter, you can just undo it, fold it over to a different place, trim the tail down if you need to. If you need it looser, then you can also scoot it a little bit, length of tail allowing. But fold it over, and then you have your keepers. Your keeper is going to go over it like that, and you want it to be tight. A couple things to note: there are a lot of different ways that you can do the smaller keepers. I used to have them overlap in the back and Chicago screw through that. The problem with that I didn't like was that it would add quite a bit of bulk, and then the buckle would stick up sort of out from this more. Recently what I've started doing is actually sewing them in a not super sophisticated manner, but in a way that has worked for me. I take my hole punch and I put it on the smallest setting. I poke 2 holes on each side. Alright, now that I've gotten those, I'm going to take a bit of my thread here. This is the leather specifically, thread specifically for leather sewing. It is pretty tough, it is waxed, which is very helpful. I'm going to use not fabric scissors on this because that would kill your fabric scissors. These are ones that have been long been designated as not fabric scissors. Cut a piece of thread, and then I am going to hand just sew these two sides together using the holes that I just punched. You can do this a lot more sophisticatedly with an actual like needle designated for sewing leather, but I find that this way works and is pretty easy. And if you're doing it with a whole needle, this can actually be a little bit on the small side for that. Alright, so I have this little crossover here. I'll post a better photo of this. I'm going to fold this over. I'm going to stick part of it through, fold it over, because I want to be able to make this as tight as possible so that we have as much friction as we can. So I'm going to fold it, pull it together. I'm going to start my knot by folding it over, or like doing just a normal knot, and then I'm going to do it one more time over just to give it that sort of extra wrap. That will help it hold while I'm, not having a whole knot in it while I'm trying to make that tension as tight as possible. I just find that that is easier for me. I'm going to push it in, sort of pull as much as possible, take that slack out of the thread, pull my knot together, and tie the other half of that knot. And then you end up with something like this. I'm gonna tie this knot a couple more times, and then I'm gonna tuck the tails back through these holes, and then trim them on the other side just so that they're hidden. Sometimes I'll tie a knot on the other side as well just to keep the tails inside. So I have my keepers for the small belt, but before I add the buckle, I'm going to use the buckle to figure out the spacing for the studs. So I have my little buckle here. I'm doing gold metal work on this one. I did silver on the black belt. It is really up to you and your personal preference. Just note that the color of your buckle should match the color of your belt studs. So all of the metal work on your belt should be the same color. I'm going to find the midpoint of my belt, approximately. I'm just going to eyeball it. You can measure it if you want. And then you're going to use a measuring tape to mark out how far your belt studs should be from each other. So in general, you're going to have your belt buckle in the middle, and then you're going to have 3 sets of studs on each side. Those spacing between the stud sets should all be even. Generally, what I'll do is I'll do 3 inches between the buckle and the first set of studs, and then 4, 4, and 4. So 4 inches between the sets of studs, 3 inches between the buckle, the edge of the buckle, and the first set of studs. If you are needing a particularly longer belt, I will sometimes adjust the spacing so that it's like 4 inches and then 5 and 5 and 5, just so that your belt studs are evenly distributed around the belt. But a little bit up to you. Just try and keep those even and figure out really what that spacing works for you. For this belt, I'm going to do 3 inches from the buckle to the first set of studs, and then 4 between the set of studs. So I'm going to use my measuring tape. I'm going to measure out 3 inches. I'm going to use my stylus, if I can find where I put it, there we go, to mark in the middle of the belt 3 inches. I'm putting the mark in the middle of the belt. Again, this is just like a little dot, a little imprint in the leather. I'm putting it in the middle because I don't want to deal with measuring where the belt studs need to be this way quite yet. And if I put it in the middle of the belt, it's going to be hidden under the thinner belt and no one's going to see it. So I've measured out my 3 inches. Now I'm going to do 4 inches. 4. And 4. Then I'm going to take my measuring tape, and my thinner belts are 3/4 inches wide, so I want to mark on here in a way that there is 3/4 inches between the marks that I'm making. 5/8 in is what I'm doing. I think that math is coming out right. 5/8 in. There we go. So I'm marking that, and then there is 3/4 inches in between those dots. I'm gonna mark that on all of these. All right. Now, I'm gonna do this on the other side as well, but for now, I'm just gonna show you. I'm gonna take the largest of the things on my hole punch. If you're using belt studs that are particularly small at the base, you might want to test this out and not use the largest. But the ones I'm using are relatively large at the base, so I'm going to use the largest. There will be some wiggle room in them, but I like that because it lets me not worry about having to have these be perfectly spaced, and as soon as you tighten them, they won't move. So, take my hole punch. I don't want to do it right on the centered where the hole is, because there is going to be some thickness to the belt studs, and if it's centered on there, then the width between the studs is going to be too small. So I'm going to just punch with the edge of the hole punch on the dot, so the inner edge of the hole punch on the dot. So I'm punching on the outside of the dot, just with it on the edge. I'm going to do all 3 of these and then flip it over. Alright, so you have your holes punched. Stick the back of the stud, that's the part that has the screw on it, through the belt from the back. Hold it in place. Take the front of your belt stud and screw it on. You can leave it a little wiggly to begin with. Because what I'm then going to do is take the thinner belt and put it between them and see if they need to adjust at all around where they are in their holes. Adjust them nicely, hold them in place, take my trusty butter knife, or screwdriver if you want to be reasonable about it, and tighten them so that they are no longer wiggly. Go. That is your first set of belt studs. I'm going to do that on the other sets on this half, and then do the same thing on the other side. Alright, so now I've got all my studs in, 3 sets on each side. Now it's time to attach the buckle to the thinner belt. So you want to slide on your keeper first, then slide on half the buckle, fold over the tail underneath, and slide that keeper over both tails, and it should fit pretty snug so that when it's all in, you can pull on it pretty hard and it won't slip. You want to do that on both ends, and there you have your inner belt that is adjustable. So you can adjust it to be whatever size you need, within, the limits of how long your piece of leather is. The way this will work when it goes into the regular rest belt is you just slide, wrap it together. This goes on the outside, goes in between. So here you have your buckle. It is most of the way done. The last thing is you have to have something to cover this overlap here in the back. That's where the larger keeper comes into play. It will go over here like so, and will cover up that sort of overlap. There's several different ways that you can close this. You can glue it if you want, you can sew it, you can do what I usually do, which is Chicago screw it, because I'm lazy and no one is ever going to see that part of it, unless you're putting your belt on incorrectly. So the way I'll do it, for Chicago screws. That's what I'm gonna do on this one. I'm not gonna bother measuring things. I'm just gonna eyeball it because if it's not even, no one is going to see it. So I'm gonna poke 2 holes on one side. Get my overlap here so that I can make sure that I am doing it to the correct tightness. Fold it over. I'm gonna hold it there while I use my little stylus to mark the center of each of those holes on the bottom piece of leather. Poke those holes. This is where you do want to center your hole punch on the holes that you just poked. And there's a couple different ways of doing the Chicago screws here. If you have ones like I have here that are a little bit thicker, again, this is the same problem of the previous one, the previous original trilogy style belt, where if you poke it all the way through, there's going to be a little bit that is sticking out here. No one's going to see this part of the belt. It does not matter. If you really want to, you can put a little piece of extra leather in there, or you can use, there are some different types of Chicago screws you can use that are like thinner here. These ones actually are too thin for what I want them to do, but there are different lengths, so you can just look around on the internet for that. In the meantime, I'm going to put the other back end of the screw in. Again, there is some sticking out here of the screw. Again, I don't care because no one's going to see it. Alright, so you have your wider keeper now, and the way this is all going to go together, so I'm going to unbuckle one side. This is a front release one, so I push down in the middle, pull the side out. I'm going to undo one side of it so that it all comes apart. I'm going to slide the keeper on one side through the thin belt through it and the thick belt, just making sure that it is turned so that the part that does not have the screws on it is on the outside. And then I'm going to fold this over. I'm going to bring the thinner belt back through the studs and clip it in to the other side here. Oop. And this is where it becomes adjustable. It's a lot easier if you're doing it around someone, so it's not trying to like angle weirdly on you. This is where it becomes adjustable because you can, as you're putting this on, you can slide this tighter. If you need to, you can make these tighter, and you want to, as you're doing that, just slide that thicker keeper over both ends of the belts and slide it so that it covers that that edge of the thicker belt. And there you have your belt. The spacing of the studs on this is probably better for a slightly smaller belt than I made, but you can always make it smaller, you can't make it larger. If you need to trim it down, you can just trim the ends, dab them with a little bit of dye in case they get visible, and there you have your belt. So you have, there we go, you have your Prequel Trilogy style belt, and you have your wiggly, because there's not tension on it, original Trilogy style belt.